Oh no! Welcome to Mean Age Daydream with me, Brian McWilliams, where we're going to be making some jokes, laughing out at broken world, but also laying out some philosophy for the future, how we can fix this mess we're in and have a great time doing it all with a Mean Age Daydream. Whoops, gotta love that. Coughing into the microphone before the show even starts because I hit the wrong button. That's what happens sometimes when you're in a hurry, which I am, because they keep holding these debates on Tuesday nights, which means I can't do the show as I usually do, which is that I record on Tuesdays and they air Wednesdays. Instead, I had to watch the debate this morning because it was my anniversary last night and I could not watch it live because my wife would have been very upset. And I have just finished it. But I also have to do work calls, and then I have to go watch my kid run around in a field because there's some fundraising, I don't know, field day, fun day, romp day, some obstacle course, which me, as a loving father, has to go attend at my kid's elementary school today. So we're going to make this quick. This episode's going to be half an hour or less, but welcome to the show. Welcome to Mean Age Daydream. I'm, of course, Brian McWilliams, your beautiful bald host. And I'll give you a quick rundown of what I saw in the debate. And unfortunately, you know, I had read some of the articles, some of the previews about the debate itself, and I said, all right, well, let me see if I have any different takeaways. I really don't. I mean, it was a one-sided affair, in my opinion. JD Vance is clearly more poised, more intelligent than Tim Walz. Tim Walz looks like if you took a gecko, pulled it out from under a rock, and then slapped it on live television. I mean, everything about it, even his goofy, wide-eyed grin and his doofus face. I mean, Tim Walz has definitively a bulldog doofus face. It's hard. It's honestly hard to look at the guy and take away anything but a sheer disdain for whatever mental capacity he may have. It's honestly boggling to my mind that he became a governor, that he somehow was in charge of a major city, although you look how that turned out horribly. Basically allowed it to be burned to the ground. I don't know how you could look at the man and have any trust in him. He comes across as a completely, I'd say, ignoramus. You know, you don't hear ignoramus anymore, but Tim Walz came across as an ignoramus, parroting some of the dumber phrases that the Harris-Walz campaign has continued to push out there. So let's get into it. I have one clip from the debate that I want to share because one of the things that Tim Walz has been so bad on and been called out on is misinformation. They did get to talk about that later in the debate. I mean, starting off, of course, we're starting this thing. Israel, Iran. Unfortunately, Trump and Harris are both in the same camp. They are both Israel suckers. They love them. They'll support them. Of course, everybody goes on a limb talking about how they're going to go out there and they're going to right the ship and how they're our greatest ally and they have to be defended and all this crap. Naturally, we have already given Israel billions upon billions of dollars. I have made my stance on this very clear that we shouldn't give them a single dime yet. Both of these guys essentially backed up the current stance on Israel, which is, yeah, you know what? You got to back your coalitions. You got to give them what they need. I mean, they were talking about how, and I actually do acknowledge this. I did not like Donald Trump pulling out of the Iran deal that was created under Barack Obama. I believe in diplomacy far more than I do in hard stances and sanctions, which of course is just attacks and warfare on the population. And if you know anything about Iran's population, they are not well off. Okay, period, flat out. And whatever arguments people try to make for sanctions that somehow the populace is going to raise up because they're pissed off at us, you know, but it's the government's fault. It's their government's fault. So they're going to overthrow their government, even though we're doing all the damage, doesn't track. It doesn't work. It's never worked. It will never work. And yet people double, triple down on this entire concept of stupid ass sanctions. Long story short, both terrible on the concept of Israel and Iran. And both went along with the bullshit that Iran is going to have a nuclear weapon in a week. I don't know where this study came from other than out of the mouth of Netanyahu. Now, if you have followed along with the fun that is Netanyahu on Iran and their capabilities on a nuclear standpoint, well, they have apparently had the capability to create a nuke, and it's just weeks or months away for the past 20 years. They say the same thing They say it repetitively. We see the parroting in the media. We see the parroting in our politicians because it is an excuse to continue to fund the war machine, to continue to fund Israel, to continue our presence in the Middle East. Yet, I've not seen any nuke coming out of Iran. And frankly, I'll tell you this. I don't think if Iran had the ability to make a nuke, they were going to use it on Israel. Do you know why? Here's why. They would be wiped from the face of the earth instantly. Not just by us, by every power in the region. You cannot have somebody randomly having nukes and, oh, now they can use the nukes. No. Were they to develop one, it would be purely defense, right? Just like Israel that doesn't have nukes, wink. It would be developed, and then they would say, hey, by the way, we've got it. Don't mess with us, right? That would be it. And if they could do that, they would have done that. They would have done it 20 years ago like Netanyahu had promised. They clearly haven't and won't. That's it. Well, I can't say won't. Maybe they will at some point. But the odds of Iran developing and deploying nuclear arms is so infinitesimally small because of the backlash that would happen. You already know what happens. They're already accused of doing this and that and being the funds of terrorism. The only thing I guess you could say, well, if they develop it, then they're going to give it to these terrorists, and then the terrorists will use it. And then, but again, I think at this point, it's very clear what the response would be. I don't even think Iran is really working that hard to do it, if I'm being perfectly honest. But yet, it's the boogeyman that gets trotted out and parroted, and now it's a week away, guys. Isn't that amazing? It's just a week away. I'm going to set my calendar. I'm going to set a clock on my watch, and we'll see when the timer goes off 1 week from now if Iran has trotted out a nuclear weapon. Because I'm willing to bet my fucking ball sack that there's not going to be any announcement. Because it's bullshit. So that really pissed me off in the debate. I will say that. Moving on, I think Walz did have kind of a funny line. I'll give it to him. But probably the only thing that I thought he did well in the entire debate was talking about Trump's crowd size. Now, if you recall from the Harris-Trump debate, and as I mentioned, there was a lot of repetition in this debate, which also was 2 hours long. Why? The presidential debate was like 90 minutes long. Why do we have a 2-hour vice presidential debate that people care less about than the presidential debate? Why would you stretch that to 2 hours? We don't need to know that much from these candidates. We just don't. Anyway, Walz had said that Donald Trump got distracted on the topic of, Israel and Iran, where they were talking about it, and he'd rather focus on crowd size. Now, that was a good line. Why? Because Harris had basically lured Trump into talking about his crowd sizes, one of several times that she had waylaid his train of thought during that first debate that they had. It was stupid of Trump to respond to it. He couldn't resist the bait, and it was actually a good move by Walz to bring it up because it made Trump look petty and stupid. And, sorry guys, still get over this cough a little bit. Also, you can tell that the Walz-Harris campaign had one thing they wanted to push during this because they said it over and over again, and that was calmness and steadiness. Now, during the Walz speech about Iran and Israel, he was talking about how Kamala Harris had shown that there's a calmness she had, an ability to build coalitions. Where? Show me one time Kamala Harris has been calm, because I've never seen it. And show me one place that Kamala Harris has ever actually shown any leadership in international diplomacy, manner, coalition building. What are you talking about? What are you talking about? She's done none of these things. Zero. Absolutely none of it. So it was funny to hear him make this complete crap up. And of course, Walz lied about numerous things during this debate. But the steady comment was interesting. Not that I've ever seen Kamala Harris even steady. Kamala Harris is a nut. If you see her speak, she is wildly emotive. It makes no sense. She is probably the opposite of what you'd say is steady. I would say she is a erratic lunatic. So maybe this was intentional in two ways, right? The tactic here, again, from my putting my PR hat here, and the way that words and actions should convey something. So the clear intention here was to say steady and to paint Donald Trump as the wild card, the lunatic. And look, he is. There's no denying it. It's basically, do you want to have the demon that you know is president, who, despite being a wild card lunatic, actually had a far more calm foreign policy positioning than did the the Biden-Harris campaign, right? Can't argue that. Yes, what happened in Yemen with Saudis was horrible. Yes, he still dropped a lot of bombs, but overall, I think it was a far calmer foreign policy and a far more diplomatic foreign policy than what we see now with Ukraine wars raging, with, failed Afghani pullouts, which are still in favor of pulling out of there, by the way, with what's going on with Israel, all these different, and of course, new initiative across the globe. One of the fantastic post-fact check, because obviously they did zero fact checking in the first debate, and the moderators, despite in the very beginning saying that their role wasn't to be the fact checkers, but in fact to allow the candidates to fact check each other, went out of their way to fact check JD Vance several fucking times, which was obnoxious. But in the first debate, you recall, Kamala Harris said, well, there's none of our soldiers are deployed into combat zones right now, active combat zones, creating one of the most hilarious memes ever, where soldiers in barracks in active combat zones had said, where the fuck are we then? So, getting back to the point here, I did think that it was hilarious to try to paint Kamala Harris as a steady presence, and somehow, as opposed to Donald Trump, when they are at worst two peas in a pod. You cannot separate their, I'd say, wildly swinging moods. Although I don't know how Donald Trump is behind closed doors. From reports, he's not a son of a bitch, as opposed to Kamala Harris, who, from reports leaked by her own people about a year and a half ago, paint her as a wildly angry, mood-swinging, abusive lunatic whose staff despise her and have heavy turnover. I'm just saying. All right, getting back on this, Vance was asked, and I can't remember what question this was, but it cracked me up. A question about something or other, and he went out of his way. It was kind of like, in the beginning, they asked him a question, and he goes, well, first, let me tell you about who I am. I was from a working class home. I was laughing out loud because, of course, it reminded me heavily of when Kamala Harris was asked about her economic positions, which, of course, are a joke, and just went into a soliloquy on how she was raised in a working class home. Okay. Moving forward, moderators push more climate change nonsense. I thought JD Vance did a pretty good job about this, basically saying, look, I'm not going to debate you on climate change in this debate. We need to focus on bringing back manufacturing. We need to focus on bringing back energy to the United States so we're not dependent on foreign sources, all of which I agree with. I went on a rant last show, which, again, I apologize for doing my quick rant about climate and then having to saddle you with the first episode podcast, which I presume you are all subscribers to now. But I was just too sick last week. However, I had said in that it makes no sense to me to focus on controlling the carbon in the atmosphere. And instead, it makes far more sense to me to make efforts towards building out capacity, capability, technological infrastructure to withstand a changing climate, which could happen far more rapidly than this, who gives a damn 1 degree of change, which would be fairly easy for us to overcome. And building out infrastructure and energy, as JD Vance is talking about, building out onshore manufacturing so we're not having to worry about altering seas and hurricanes abroad, makes a lot more sense to me than anything coming out of the Harris-Walz campaign about, climate douchebaggery. So that was interesting. I also, they, of course, went into the entire issue of the hurricane. I was furious that there was not a debunking done of the claims that these hurricanes have gotten more severe and stronger, which is nonsense. They haven't. In fact, we have actually had a lower instance of hurricanes and extreme weather events. These people are saying that climate change made this Asheville event a far greater impact. No, not true. I think it was in 1919. There was a massive storm flood that essentially destroyed the town, similar to what happened today, but even more so, obviously, because the construction was different. This is all bullshit. But, Democrats are going to be convinced of this no matter what, and moderators are, of course, in the camp for that. Okay, moving on. Walz just massively lying about green job creation under the the Inflation Reduction Act, which has, of course, done nothing to reduce inflation and is just full of handouts for cronies. Vance absolutely crushed Walz on the border. Not surprising. Walz, of course, parroted once more the completely irrelevant point that Harris keeps making when asked about border, that she prosecuted international gangs. Who gives a fuck? Nothing to do with the border, nothing to do with border, illegal immigrants coming over the border, nothing to do with child separations as they kept talking about on the border, nothing to do with deportations, nothing to do with sanctuary cities, nothing to do with the policies eroding all of the border policies, nothing to do with building a wall. You trying to prosecute international, gangs of drugs and traffickers or whatever it might be, which I doubt you did very well anyway, Kamala Harris, has nothing to do with the question. Every time they bring this stupid shit up, which they obviously do, it's drilled into their heads. It pisses me off more. I hope it's making other Americans even more angry. All right, what's else? I thought Vance did a great job talking about the economy and how the experts that have all endorsed Kamala Harris's campaign were basically wrong on everything in the past. They continue to be wrong. Let's not forget that the economists and the Nobel laureates that had backed the Biden-Harris plan to use trillions and trillions of dollars during COVID to pump that into the economy, which caused this massive inflation spiral, along with Donald Trump, by the way, had all, they had all said, oh, this is going to be great. This is going to be fine. It's not going to cause massive inflation. Okay, wrong. Take all their Nobel Prizes back. But of course, nobody wants to talk about that. They just want to talk about how these people have their pat on the head, which is political. By the way, the Nobel Prize, a political appointment anyway. It's a political prize. It's based on almost zero to do with economics or actual real world impact at this point in time. But good on Vance pointing out that under Harris, you had the possibility to reduce inflation, right? And what has happened? 25% increase in foods, essential goods. If she had a plan to change it, they would have put the plan into action. She has an example of failure, as is the Biden administration. The economists, the experts that backed them up clearly were full of shit. And yes, Donald Trump had a far better economic system, or at least a far better economic result, because I have a hard time really putting too much on the plates of presidents in regards to economics specifically, unless they pump trillions of dollars into the economy. But he made a good point that take-home pay from taxpayers was much higher, that Kamala Harris and Biden had a chance to improve the economy. They haven't, so why would you believe their plans now? Excellent. Well done. And then I hated this as well. The Democrats, their fallback, Harris did it, Walz did it, is to blame Donald Trump's handling of COVID, which, for 6 months, right? I think that's how long Donald Trump was in office during COVID, when every country basically did the same thing, for better or worse. And yet they keep blaming his handling of COVID, which, by the way, they then took his policies and quadrupled down on them. Just how we got where we are. And then to sum this up, and then, like I said, I'm not going to rehash it. It was so much repetition of the previous discussions, and it was so boring to watch for the most part. There's one more thing I want to show you guys, and then I'm going to go on to a couple other quick issues here today. So this video I thought was great because we're talking about misinformation. We're talking about JD Vance ripping a new one for Tim Walz, because Tim Walz is on file saying that disinformation is not protected, that you can't yell a fire in a crowded theater, that blah 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 blah. So let me share this one real quick for you guys. Whoops, hold on, let me make this large. Share this, and then we're going to move on to a fascinating tale of woe for DEI-centric Ubisoft, and we'll finish up with the Mafia boss for the ports. Okay. Here we go.
Guys attack us for not believing in democracy. The most sacred right under the United States democracy is the First Amendment. You yourself have said there's no First Amendment right to misinformation. Kamala Harris wants to use the power of government.
I think we need to push back on this. There's no guarantee to free speech on misinformation.
And big tech to silence people from speaking their minds. That is a threat to democracy that will long outlive this present political moment. I would like Democrats and Republicans to both reject censorship. Let's persuade one another. Let's argue about ideas, and then let's come together afterwards.
You can't yell fire in a crowded theater.
You can, dummy.
That's the test. That's the Supreme Court.
You can.
Tim, fire in a crowd.
You can, by the way. You can do that. That was overturned. It's a fallacy. Anybody you say everybody that you hear tell you that you can't yell fire in a crowded theater is a fucking moron. All right, finish it up, JD.
Crowded theater, you guys wanted to kick people off of Facebook for saying that toddlers shouldn't wear masks.
Senator, the governor does have the floor.
Okay, there you go. So, of course, they cut him off. Whoops, let me close this. They cut off JD Vance all night long, by the way. Just constantly cutting off JD Vance. But thank you for ripping Tim Walz on this. And here, even now, Tim Walz is trying to defend that, oh, well, you don't have a free speech right to hate speech. Yes, you fucking do. Yes, you fucking do. You do. You have a free, even if you don't like it, you still have a right to say whatever you want to say. If it's mean, tough shit. And why? I've said this so many times before. For anybody watching out there that doesn't understand why hate speech is protected speech, who defines hate speech? That's all you have to ask yourselves. I've given this example a million times, but it's a good example. During slavery, it would have been considered hate speech by the government, which had tacitly, either in California, they're arguing, right? California, by the way, just passed a thing apologizing for slavery. We never had slavery in California, but they said that California, despite being a free state, had basically tacitly accepted slavery. During the time of slavery, when the government had permitted slave owners to create human chattel and force them into labor, to say that a black man was equal to a white man or had those rights would have been considered hate speech and outlawed. That's why it's important, because who defines the terms of hate speech, of misinformation, of disinformation, whatever that fucking is going to be the government. It's going to be who's in power at the time, which means you disenfranchise anybody that is not on the side of the government. And guess what? The government's not good 99% of the time. The people in power in the government are not good 99% of the time. And fucking Democrats, of all people, should understand that, because they're the ones that are always arguing that we should tear down all the statues for people, what? That were in the government in times past, and yet they're too dumb to understand that those people, that these times change, and that speech changes, and the definitions of what is hate speech, what is disinformation, what is the standard narrative for truth are always changing and have to be able to be questioned. Fucking idiots. Okay, let's move on. Fastest 30 minutes. I got to finish this in 10 minutes. All right, so Ubisoft, if you're not up to date on this, Ubisoft is a French company, French-owned company that, of course, now has numerous subsidiaries across the globe and is an international corporation that used to be very profitable, right? It has Assassin's Creed, it had Star Wars games, it had, I think, Tom Clancy's Seal 6 games. These were all massive, massive profit centers for a long time that pumped their stock to something like $95 a share. Then they decided to go woke, go broke. They hired companies like Sweet Baby Inc., which I've talked about on the show before. Essentially, this was a black gamers consultancy that came in and told companies, you're racist, and we have to fix your game because you're racist, and you don't understand, you're racist. So they'd hire them. They would then come in, change the games, ruin it. The game would go on to be released. Gamers would hate it. It would plummet and make no sales. This has been throughout the gaming industry. Sony just had a game called Concord. Let me bring up my notes here. Which came out and was essentially canceled within about 2.5 or 3 weeks of release. This game was so woke. It was all female characters of color, various sizes, none of which were particularly likable. It had one, obviously a popular trans influencer voicing one of the characters in a very annoying way. Gamers hated it. Who's your target audience? Non-binary, trans / multicultural gamers. I hate to break it to you, there's not that many people out there, and the average gamer doesn't want to have you constantly pushing this crap down their throat and just making a game which the focus is less on gameplay and fun and interesting characters than it is on sending a message. It cost $400 million for Sony to make it. It was canceled within 3 weeks. What does that tell you? So they got destroyed. The latest one, and also Star Wars Outlaws, this is another Ubisoft game. They nerfed the hot female lead. And I've seen the side-by-side screenshots of this. Now, the game itself supposedly is just not that good. The gameplay is not great. They guide you down a very linear path, despite promising that it was supposed to be an open world where you could make your own choices and decisions on character development. Outlaws, indicating that you might be able to be a bad guy. No, they still push you to be a good guy and have this moral path with a female lead character who they made ugly as shit. Now, look, I'm not saying you can't have female lead characters, but the thing is, a lot of gamers like attractive female lead characters. Stellar Blade, I think it's called Stellar Blade, has a super hot female lead character. It was an incredibly popular game. Yeah, on the other hand, you've got Star Wars Outlaws with a chud that looks like, I don't even know. It looks like what like Winona Ryder if you shaved her hair down and hit her with a baseball bat, maybe. That's maybe not even. God, who's that chick that talks out of the side of her mouth? Helen something? Doesn't matter. They ugged her out. Not only do male gamers not like this, female gamers don't like this either, except for a very small subsect, as I mentioned before, of your non-binary fuggos who are not your major gaming audience. So the latest is that Ubisoft created a game called Assassin's Creed Shadows. It had been, really built up because it had the quote-unquote first black Japanese samurai as its lead in it. Now, how would that make sense to have a Japanese samurai in full armor going around in an Assassin's game? Don't explain that to me. Apparently, it doesn't make much sense historically either, because according to the Japanese scholars, I think his name's Yasuki, or Yasuke, I don't know how you pronounce it in Japanese, but he was not a samurai, number one. He was essentially a slave vassal to a samurai lord, to a shogun, or to, whatever you want to call it, Nobunga at the time. The idea that this guy was a freestanding samurai is completely historically nonsense. And the Japanese people are pissed off about that, especially the gamers that like these games. They were looking forward to having a Japanese game with a Japanese protagonist. And of course, that got replaced with DEI BS. And they had such a backlash, basically a total boycott from a lot of gamers here in the US and internationally, a huge backlash from Japan, that the game has now been pushed back to February. And the rumors, and I believe this has been confirmed, the rumors are that they are taking out the main character. Like, this black samurai is now going to be replaced. I don't know if that's factually going to happen or not. That seems like it would take a lot of work, but I don't know. Maybe it's easier than I know to simply swap out a model and put it through the game. You probably have to do some fine tuning. But if that's the case, it is, number one, a win for anti-DEI activists, because just shoveling these things down people's throats, despite, historical inaccuracies and basically a lack of gamer enthusiasm, seems stupid. And these people are only going to change when they start losing millions and billions of dollars, as you're seeing in the entertainment industry currently. But it shows you that Ubisoft, which went from $95 and now is at $10.40 a share, and this is all from these recent losses, that these companies are finally hitting a pressure point. It's always come around to the marketplace, right? If they're not feeling market pressures, they're not going to change. If they think that you're dumb enough to just buy a game based upon a title, based upon a promise that it's going to be great, guys, don't worry, and they think that they can abuse you with pushing this narrative and pushing, quote unquote, the message, until you stop buying it, they're going to keep doing it. And look, Bud Light, Target, now you're seeing it with Sony, now you're seeing it with Ubisoft. Warner Brothers got slapped down because they made a Suicide Squad game, which was very woke and bullshitty and lefty. And, the common theme of these is still this Sweet Baby Inc. company throughout them all. But you're finally seeing change. You're seeing companies forced into adjusting how they operate, what they push down your throat, and actually having to listen to gamers. Because what would happen is that gamers would get pissed. Dipshit leftist gaming writers like at Kotaku.com and IGN and others would tell you, well, it's because these bigot gamers out there are mad. This is a wonderful game. How can you not like these characters? Guess what? They suck. Just like movies written suck with all these characters. People don't want to see them. They don't want to buy them. And they're stopping. And now the change is coming slowly because it takes a long time to turn a big ship, but you're finally seeing it happen. So high fives to everybody involved. Keep the pressure on. Make sure these people stop making games centered around messages and start making experiences, films, television series that are actually good, and hire good people to make them rather than checkboxing everything under this guise of woke America, woke international global cabals, the WEF handing down the new global order on what is acceptable in our entertainment. Okay, last thing, guys, let me play another video here, and then I have got to jump off. I will just say, I've got friends that work in the ports. I've got family members that work in the ports. But right now, what you're seeing is a port worker strike. It's coming at a time when obviously Americans are hurting. Americans are hurting. They're paying out the ass. And yet you've got these fucking unionists, these mafia members coming out here and saying, well, we're going to make your life even more miserable unless you bend over and give us what I want. And point being here, I hate unions flat out. I can't stand the way they operate, as I said, as essentially mafia organizations. And I'm not talking just about negotiating tactics and strong talk. I'm talking about physically assaulting people, which they have done on record before. I'm talking about cronyism, making deals with states that force people to join unions, which is anti-free market, anti-free labor, anti-freedom in fucking general, anti-free choice. It sickens me. And listening to this jackass who is heading up the strike now that these port workers are doing from, in every major port that's going to make life miserable. Well, listen to what this guy says and tell me there's any difference between him and somebody in organized crime. Let's see here. It always takes me a minute to get this freaking thing up. All right, let's listen to this jerk off and then we'll call it a day.
These people today don't know what a strike is.
Right.
When my men hit the streets, from Maine to Texas, every single port will lock down. You know what's going to happen? I'll tell you. First week, be all over the news every night, boom, boom. Second week, guys who sell cars can't sell cars because the cars ain't coming in off the ships. They get laid off. Third week, malls start closing down. They can't get the goods from China. They can't sell clothes. They can't do this. Everything in the United States comes on a ship. They go out of business. Construction workers get laid off because the materials aren't coming in. The steel's not coming in. The lumber's not coming in. They lose their job. Everybody's hating the longshoremen now because now they realize how important our jobs are. Now I have the president screaming at me, I'm putting a Taft-Hartley on you. Go ahead. Taft-Hartley means I have to go back to work for 90 days. That's a cooling off period. Do you think when I go back for 90 days, those men are going to go to work on that pier? It's going to cost the company's money to pay their salaries. Well, they went from 30 moves an hour maybe to 8. They're going to be like this. Who's going to win here in the long run? You're better off sitting down and let's get a contract and let's move on with this world. And in today's world, I'll cripple you.
Look at this piece of garbage, man. Tell me the difference. Tell me the difference. Boy, I'll be sad if something happened to you, Johnny. You work there, Johnny. It'd be terrible if your meat shipment didn't get it on time. Ah! What a fucking piece of shit. Yeah. Yep. There's your union boss, guys. There's what these leftists, that's what they want you to believe is a great thing for all of America, to make sure that you get these guys behind you controlling major aspects of your economy. And yeah, these guys, they're going to find out how important their jobs. Yeah, your jobs are important. You're offloading things from a ship. But I'm sorry, it's not that important that we have to kowtow to you like your doctors, like your lawyers. There should be a freedom to operate if you don't want to go on strike. But these guys will literally break your knees if you choose to go to work. They'll call you a scab. They'll blackball you. They'll smash the cars, your windows and your cars in. They'll put death threats in your mailbox. All of these things are confirmed. All these things happen regularly. God forbid people have a free choice in the matter, right? God forbid. By the way, if you want to talk about JD Vance talking about building out American infrastructure, manufacturing, hey, perfect example of why you need to do that. Longshoremen going on strike, making everybody's life vastly more expensive, doing it exactly when they know it's going to make people's life horrible. It shows you everything you need to know about unions. They're not here for you. They're not here to work for the greater good of America. They'll tell you that unions are as American as apple pie and it's good for everybody and everybody wins. No. They win protecting jobs that are not that difficult, protecting jobs from getting paid wages that should be commensurate with how that job works, with how easy it is to replace that job. They should be, to make an argument that they're out for anything but the betterment, the protection of their own union members, at the absolute rapage of the rest of America is a joke and a lie. And to think anything else other than that is just simplistic. And you see people like this talking about it in that manner, as this man does, it really lays it bare. So sorry to my family members that work in the unions at the ports right now, but it is what it is. Fuck this guy. And I hope this strike ends quickly, as does everybody else. And of course, since they're doing it in such a manner to try to cripple American economies and put everybody else in a far greater economic hole than there already are, geez, let's just write them a big thank you letter, guys, and make sure that we send them flowers because we appreciate how hard it is to take things off a boat and put them on a dock. All right, that's it. From me, Brian McWilliams, from the Lions of Liberty, and from Mean Age Daydream, keep those electric eyes on me, babe. Keep that ring into my head. I got to go. I'm already late for something. Okay.